And welcome back to GBS Morning Extra. If you are just joining us, coming to you live from our station here in Nairobi. And as I promised earlier, the whole of this week, probably we've been focusing on the issue of the coronavirus. And as you know by now, it has taken a toll on the activities, the daily activities of many. And of course, we saw the other day the president come out and put restrictions. Kids are at home, universities, high schools, all these are shut down. The president also urged that if people can work from home, even better. And we've also been looking at some of the protective measures, but then there's also another aspect that is a reality. And I'm going to read something very small here, an excerpt that I got from an article by the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, which say that Kenya should prepare for a long period of coronavirus-related restrictions like it is happening elsewhere in the world. We've seen elsewhere in the world, countries like the United States trying to lower taxes, trying to remove taxes actually, trying to intervene in some other sectors like the cab sector, I would say taxi industry, that's the transport industry, and just try to compensate those who are not pensionable, and those who are not in formal kinds of employment. Now, a Kenya Private Sector Alliance survey predicts tough economic times resulting from the coronavirus outbreak. Among them, mostly and directly affected are the hotel and hospitality industry, which, according to KEPSA, may see up to 40% decline in this year alone. And if you talk to people in the industry, they place this way even above the 40% because, of course, they feel the effect of it. And also the private sector generally now puts the figures to 61%, that is, of businesses that has already, as of now, reported negative effects due to the COVID-19 outbreak. And because of that, today we have with us in studio an entrepreneur, if I may call him that, and a long-time friend, Nicholas Muli. Nicholas Muli. Yes. Nick, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Government restrictions, and I would call them restrictions right now because we are dealing with a pandemic. We are dealing with an outbreak of a disease that doesn't have a cure yet, and yes, so correct. We are still at the preventive measure. Yes. We are still trying to just prevent it. We don't know how to cure it. We don't know how many cases are out there, and that's why the government is, trying to employ these, measures to see to it that we protect ourselves as much as possible. But there's the knock-on effect of the same in the industry, like I introduced. Which industry are you in? And maybe we can start with that. And how you personally do you see the effects of this?
Yeah, correct. My name is Nicholas Muli. I am an entrepreneur, as you have stated. And majorly I operate from Ngong area and also other areas in Kenya. I run different types of businesses, but majorly I would today want to focus on the effect of this coronavirus, this disease on hotels, and how it is affecting the tourism industry. Since it was announced by the president that and since we got the first case in Kenya, we have, as business people, started feeling the effect. For example, I've looked at the statistics on the sales before and the sales after. Things have really changed, and everything is going down. And what brings the major challenge is the fact that we are not sure how long this thing is going to take.
Sure.
We are not aware of how many days this is going to take, and the effect is really going to be great from what we are looking at at the moment. Yes.
Right before we started, and I mean, in the small chat that you're having, the coronavirus, it takes about 45 days to peak, which Kenya has not yet achieved since our first case, we've not attained to that 45 days. And already you guys are feeling the effects of, you know, how the businesses are now being affected now. What is your projection in terms of, as the case continues to escalate, how do you see, you know, and where do you see the industry and where do you see the businesses in Kenya?
It looks like some, and this means many businesses,
Yes.
they might have to close down, especially hotels. We've had so many cancellations, especially on bookings, which are forward bookings. So in the next few months, some businesses might have and might be forced to close down. Because if you're operating a business and then it happens that then you are not making sales and also there's no activity, then it beats logic. No point to keep on opening the business because we still have the fixed costs which need to be catered for. So looking ahead, it means the effect of this might be quite drastic. I was reading another circular which was given by the Kajiado County government yesterday, which gave out some types of businesses which need to be closed. And among them were bars and pubs, and they've not yet really touched on the hotels and restaurants, and also undefined markets. But we expect, even if the hotels businesses are not closed, then the effect is going to be felt because some of these businesses go together. Because if, for example, you operate a butchery, which is in somewhere where there is a bar or somewhere where there is a pub, if the pub is closed, then the business, the butchery will not be able to
down,
off. Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, things are going to be tough. Things are looking forward to be tough.
You've spoken about the hotel and hospitality industry, and mainly you've touched on tourism, the cancellations that we've had. And, you know, when I had the president's address and, you know, the directions or the instructions that he gave, at this kind of this particular, when we have this peak season for, you know, the tourism industry, most of the clients or tourists come from mainly Europe, if I would say that. Italy, to be more specific. And, of course, from America. But then with the ban on, you know, travel for in terms of who can we receive in Kenya? Countries that are affected by the coronavirus already, their citizens, of course, cannot be allowed in Kenya. Where does that place the hotel industry? And let's go down to the coast and, you know, Malindi is already complaining.
Yes, because as you've mentioned, if you look at the number of tourists that come from Europe, it forms the greatest number of the expected tourists in major hotels in Kenya. And having that, having most countries already locked down, that means that also travel bans have been included in that. So what does that tell you? It tells you that those bookings, especially for hotels which have bookings from looking from the month of April onwards, they have been cancelled. And the challenge would be, if that has been cancelled, we don't know when. The biggest challenge at the moment is the fact that we don't know
when the ban will be lifted.
When the ban will be lifted, or how long is this going? This coronavirus going to take this country or the world at the way it is? Because at the moment we are told that the available options are preventive. All they require is for you to use preventive measures. So if we already don't have a solution at the moment, we are looking at a situation whereby this might be prolonged. And if it is prolonged, it is going to affect the industry very much. Because if we receive cancellations from the next month, that is the month of April, then they stretch all the way to August. Then that is like half of the year. The businesses will have been doing nothing.
Now, talk about preventive measures. I want us to come down and narrow down maybe to the, hotels and restaurants. These are places, where we could call them eateries, where we get food and so on and so forth. And the handling of food, especially at this particular time, given also the nature of how the virus itself it's spread. Of course, we know that it comes through spittle, that is through the mouth or the nose, and it enters through the skin as well. Now, there's the hand sanitation and washing of our hands and so on and so forth. Hotels are forced this time to have these things in measure. According to the governments, even when you listen to authorities speaking, they have to do that. How is it going down with the hotels? Because there's no business, and then you still also have to ensure to put in some measures which you did not put before, which means you're spending more, but you're bringing in little. How is it affecting the business?
Number one.
And how are you guys doing it?
Number one, these measures, and I was sharing with a friend of mine, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, these things are things which are meant to have been in place before. It is not, for example, in public places, in all areas where people visit, these measures which the government is directing ought to have been in place.
So they're just normal things that we have been ignoring all along.
Yes. So, yes, the cost might be detrimental to the businesses, but businesses have got no choice, because you have to be prepared. You have to also make sure that the few customers that are remaining, that are visiting your premises, are safe. So it is a cost which you cannot overlook. So you have to spend. I remember the president gave a directive that people should not take advantage of the situation. But I've seen cases where those people who are selling the hand sanitizers, the prices short.
Actually, right now they are scarce in the supermarkets.
They create the scarcity so that people can pay more.
Oh, so they practice hoarding.
Yes.
So that the supply is down and then the prices can...
Yes. I remember we bought at some point, we bought hand sanitizer, 500 ml at 290. The following day it went to 310. The following day for 450, I guess. And now I think it's retailing at 775 and 800.
But a bit controversial, but do you think that the government is not aware of this? And because I saw some supermarkets, actually, what they do is they restrict the number of items that you can pick. You can actually scan through a till. It means you cannot get more than 2. Like I saw one near, right just about our neighbor. You cannot get more than 2.
Yes, that's correct.
You scan through 2 and then that's all. It's either utume mtu ama urudi kesho ama uende urudi. I don't know how it works, but then... But then the increasing of prices, as much as we are saying that businesses cannot avoid having this kind of hand sanitizers and so on and so forth, but then the increase in prices, of course, clearly has a knock-on effect on the businesses.
It has, because for example, many hotels and many businesses didn't have hand sanitizers before. Maybe they had some hand wash points, but now this is a cost which you cannot avoid. Because everybody, and the way it has been put is that it is like the anti-sanitizer has to be there. So even if you have a wash point, then you still have to put on the hand sanitizer. So this cost, yes, and like I said, it is a cost, added cost, which has come to the businesses, but we have to bear it, because they say that when thick gets to thick, then you have to keep on pushing. So we have to put them, because again, we are dealing with a delicate situation. You don't want to lose the few customers who are trusting your business and also visiting your business. So if you have to retain those few, then you have to also make sure that you put the measures which are available. And yes, the costs are there, but you have to bear them.
Any other additional, I would call them health measures that you guys are putting on in the industry? Because, I mean, for instance, like restaurants, the person who is cooking, and so on and so forth, and you know how you also even touch the utensils and the cutleries. And if we go to the hospitality side, there's also the beddings and the walls, and it's quite a difficult time. But how do we go about this?
Yes, there are so many things which are involved, and for example, if you operate a big establishment, that means that also the areas you need to concentrate on are many. For example, if you have hotels which offers accommodation and all that, because who comes to sleep there? You don't know. Yes. And again, from the statistics and the information I have seen, this disease can stay with someone without them looking sick. And so most of the business people and most of the hotels which I know, they have put all the measures available, especially in terms of disinfecting, not only using the hand sanitizers, using detergents which are disinfectants, and also making sure that most of the areas which are commonly used are also disinfected frequently. Those are some of the measures which are there. And I understand that many businesses are putting such measures in place and making sure that those things are done. But one thing to mention maybe that I didn't mention, I was reading another article last night, and I saw that, I don't know whether it is France, one of the major producers of cosmetics has come out and say that they are going to produce sanitizers, and they are going to give them to the government for free, so that the government can distribute the same to Kenya, I mean to the public. So I'm wondering whether we are going to have something like that in Kenya, or the government is going to come in and give subsidy on such things, so that because I look at, for example, I can be able to afford a sanitizer, but what about that person there who is down there, that guy who earns 200 per day? Is he going to buy a sanitizer for...
Or is he going to buy food?
Or is he going to buy food? So these are some of the things which also the government can look at, and also to make whatever is available affordable.
Now, there was the other issue of, money exchanging hands. And especially in restaurants, say, nipe chapo moja, chapati mandondo or something like that. And we exchange hands, money exchanges hands. Are you guys implementing the cashless? How well are you? I know you are doing, but how well are you implementing the cashless, transaction?
That is also a bit tricky, because yes, we have the cashless options available.
The tills
we have the tills, we have the PDQs. But the biggest question is, as a business person, someone comes with money and they want a service, or they want a good which you produce, or something from your establishment, from your business. Are you going to refuse to take the money?
Definitely,
no.
You're going to take.
But you don't know where this money has come from.
Sure.
You don't know how many people have touched that money.
And who has touched it.
And who has touched it. So one of the things is to separate. If there's that person who is handling money, they have to be handling money and handling money alone. And every time they are done handling money, they have to go through the process of, I don't know whether to use the word cleansing, but they have to make sure that
they sanitize
themselves, and before now they move from handling cash to also another thing. And again, these departments are separate. The people who are handling food are supposed to be different from people who are handling money. The people who are serving, we call them waiters, are different from the people who are in the kitchen. So every department has different measures which are put in place.
Right.
But all in all, we try to make sure that cleanliness and hand washing, sanitization is all adhered to. Yes.
The reason I asked that is because, there's the issue of rates.
Yes.
And the other day we saw Safaricom issue a statement. From yesterday, anyone transacting, 1,000 bob coming down,
yes.
free of charge. But then I was reading an article in one of the business dailies, and it's quite clear that banks have completely gone against the idea of cutting down on transfer fees. How is this going in return to affect the industry? Because then one would prefer to use cash if they are going to be charged for transacting.
Yeah, true. I think this well thought, it is going to help. But at the same time, we also have our friends who are banks, and we know that this is a different sector. They know how they play in that sector. But I look at that person who went to Mjengo, did his job, and probably was not paid cash. They'll still have the money. For them to transact cashlessly, they have to put the money to M-Pesa. Yes. So there is no way we can say that we can do away with handling hard cash. That has to be there. Then I also talked to a friend of mine, and they told me that the banks are at the moment confused. They don't know what they expect, because yes, they exist to deal with cash and give cash services, but having the government give the directive of cashless does not mean that the banks have to close, because they have other modes which do not involve cash. Yes. But again, when you look at some of these things, the directives, I feel that there are things which ought to have been thought through. The issue should be encouraging the use of cashless in transacting, but that does not mean that you can invalidate the use of cash.
The use of cash, yeah.
Then if that is the case, then that means that also people need to be made aware that if you have a note, for example, of 100 bob, you receive it, maybe I get it from Timothy, then this note could have come from different people, and one of them,
infected person.
Yes, and we know that the incubation period for this disease is quite long. So I mean, I don't know the measures which can be put, but it is difficult to say that we will do away with the cashless, to do away with cash handling, because not everybody will be in a position to transact without cash.
Sure.
And I don't know how the rates are going to affect in terms of now what the Safaricom did, because for a PDQ, the transaction used to be chargeless for most of them. Yeah. And Safaricom coming in and saying that we have now waived transactions for below 1,000, I don't think it's something which should be able to affect the banks so much. So I think these are things which maybe with time we will be able to know the effect, and we will be able to tell, yes, this was done. How is it affecting, or how has it improved in
What's
terms
the negative or the positive?
Yeah, the positive. Yeah, in terms of now business and also the livelihood of Kenyans. Yeah,
because when you look at this, yesterday I was, as right now everybody is concerned about what the other country is doing, because we are pretty much all put into the same, I would say the same basket. What's happening in the States is happening in Kenya, is happening in South Africa. And I saw a press conference yesterday in South Africa where, the taxi, operators association, they were complaining because the government is even going to an extent of trying to bar that. And they're like, hey, look, where do we, find our living? And
yes, true.
Because most of these people depend on, for instance, like Uber drivers. And I was talking to an analyst who was telling me that in the near future, even public transport might be affected in terms of, it's either your car or no transportation. when we look at such such projections, how worried should we be?
I would say we need to be worried because, for example, assume I'm a driver and I get this call from a client. I need to pay rent, I need to provide food, I need to do this and that, and I need that money.
Yes.
I don't have a way to go and screen that client and know that they are not infected. So we are all at the mercies of God because
you don't know who is who.
Yes, you don't know who is who. So yes, these things have to come in play, and especially what you've said in public transport. If we say that no public transport, especially let's look at Nairobi, what have you said? How many people can afford to? How many people have cars? Yes.
Exactly.
How many people have vehicles? How many people can afford to hire vehicles? Very few.
Very few people.
So I think I don't know. It is going to be difficult. Some of the things to impose, if the government decides to impose some services to be stopped, and especially public transport services, then I think the directive might have a very huge impact on the economy, because not many people can afford to hire a vehicle, not many people can afford to own a vehicle, and that means that that will mean that if, for example, you work, there are distances you can walk.
Yes.
And not every employer is able to provide accommodation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or transport.
Or transport
for their workers.
So that will mean that businesses have to suffer. And as I started by saying, the biggest challenge is we don't know the period. For how long?
I'm also looking at a situation where when it comes to the ban of public transport, then that actually borders a complete shutdown.
Yes.
Lockdown, like what we saw when the situation first broke out in cities like Wuhan, places like Wuhan, and it was, unless you have to go outside, then you cannot leave the house.
True. But in Kenya, everybody is scared of that. And I look at, if we have a complete lockdown, how is this going to affect Kenyans? For example, not many Kenyans can afford to do shopping, which can take them for
and stock food maybe for a week or two.
Yeah, most Kenyans earn money for that day, and then they know that the following day they'll go out and look for money for that day as well. So that is also going to be drastic, and I'm seeing huge and big problem if the government does not come up with measures and things which, of course, it's going to help those people. Because if the government says that we are going to have a lockdown, for example, in these and these places, it also needs to come up with a way of knowing that in that place, we have people who cannot afford to sustain themselves in case of a lockdown. So it needs to come up with measures on how it is going to support such people. Yeah.
So, I mean, the government now need also to prepare, because we were debating that yesterday, and I'm sorry to say this, but take an example of an informal settlement, say such as, Mukuru Konjenga or, in Kibra.
Yeah.
And you tell these people, you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to stay indoors for a week.
Yeah,
and only if necessary you have to come out. But then again, restrictions, markets. In some areas, markets are already, like you mentioned, in Gong.
Yeah.
Some markets, informal, unidentified markets, are supposed to close down. And these are the kind of markets that we are used to. Mama Mboga hapa, Mama Mboga pale, hoteli pale, Kibanda, and so on and so forth. When such establishments or areas are shut down, and you're telling this person who can barely stock food for a week not to go out, then are we looking at a situation where the government will be forced to literally feed its population, the population?
I would say so. I would say so, because yes, you've locked me down. I cannot go out. Then I don't have food.
And I have children.
And I have children. I have things I need to take care of. For example, someone was telling me the water in Nairobi is a disaster. Water itself. So some of these things, the government needs to know that if they put those measures in place, then they need also to be ready to provide such things. They need to provide food. They need to look for areas where people have been going to fetch water outside, and where water is coming from different locations, to also provide water for those people.
Yes.
And also provide food. Yeah, because there's no way you're going to lock someone and have them wait to just starve to death.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. Yeah.
I think that's one of the greatest challenges that the government is facing right now. But the reality is that, as the disease reaches its 45 days, then the escalation also goes up. The magnitude also is so high, and there's some measures that needs to be taken. If you look around, and some very streets that are filled with people like Paris and Rome, Italy, you realize that the streets of Madrid are like ghost towns. And those are streets that are normally flooded by tourists and locals and so on and so forth. I'm trying to imagine a situation where Nairobi is on a complete shutdown, and
it's something we try not to imagine. And I know that God is going to take care of us.
Sure.
And you see, the challenge with this disease is one person has it, for example, and before they realize they have it, they've been living their life normally. So how many people do they interact with?
Their contacts.
Yes. So one person can affect or can infect so many people, because before they get to that point where they feel sickly and they go to be screened and tested, and then they are told whether they are positive or negative, they've been interacting and living with people normally. So we are looking at a situation whereby, based on what we've heard from other countries and what we've seen, the disease multiplying drastically. Especially once it is announced that the disease is already in Kenya. Yeah. So we are trying to observe in the next 40 days, in the next 50 days, in the next 1 month, what are we expecting? Because if one person has it, that means that all the people who came into contact with that person, majority of them, yes. Yeah. So I don't know. It is a very serious disaster we are in, but we know that there will be a way out.
I would also like us to shift on to another aspect of now business also in Kenya, where we realize that in Kenya we do a lot of imports.
True.
We do a lot of imports, not just from China. Of course, China is
one of them,
one of the leading, but then also from Europe and America and other areas as well. Yeah. Countries like Tanzania right now have already, had their first case the other day.
Yes.
And you realize that countries like South Africa also, who does a lot of trade with Kenya. But then, how are the border restrictions affecting business now? Of course, I do understand that goods are still coming in, but of course there's some sanitation issues that are being also addressed in the same. But then, if this continues, how is it going to affect, especially when it comes to import and export of goods?
I think it would be safe for me to say that Kenya relies so much on imports more than exports. And there is so much that we rely on from other countries. But on the other side, we can narrow it down to food, because basically when it comes to lockdown, the most important thing would be food. Is Kenya self-reliant in terms of food? Can it feed itself? So that is the bottom line. And yes, the imports are going to affect, and we are going to feel the effect. But the biggest question we are supposed to ask ourselves is this country of ours, Kenya, which we love so much, is it able to feed itself? Is it able to feed its people from what they produce locally? Because when you go to the supermarket, how many things do you see which are made in Kenya?
So many.
Buy Kenya, build Kenya. So many.
Even basic things like sugar and rice are imported.
Yeah, we were making another joke the other day. We go to a restaurant somewhere with a friend of mine, and the toothpick is board written made in China.
Made in China.
And yeah, this is the country we live in. But the bottom line is the food itself. We might not look at the imports generally, but of course we understand there is so much that we feed that comes from other countries. Yes. How is this going to be affected, or how is it being affected already? Already, yeah. Yeah, so we are looking at also a challenge, because if these restrictions are going to be put, then although I believe that Kenya to some extent we can feed ourselves, but the problem is, or the question is, for how long? For how long? Yes.
Because the reason I'm asking this is because, Nick, if you look at other countries, maybe like Taiwan, that send a lot of rice to Kenya, you realize that at this moment, people are already talking about they don't know how long it's going to go. So it means probably they'll have to cut down on exports.
True.
Especially when it comes to food stuff.
Yes.
Because they don't know how long this is going to take and what the ripple effect is going to be. So they decide to keep their food, even if not all, but then cut down on exports. And in return, countries that rely heavily on importation of food stuff and other things like Kenya now stand to put on the receiving end.
That is quite true. That is quite true, because we know that we rely on rice, which is imported, sugar, which is imported. Yet we have millers.
Even milk.
Milk.
And eggs. I'm sorry to say, but even fish today is imported. We saw the other day, in Kisumu, and it did quite cause an uproar, where we had fish from China, in their numbers, in places like that. Nick, I would like to, as we conclude, I would like to look at this situation and ask you maybe to just give your view on, on a scale of 1 to 10. And maybe you can support your answer by giving us a little facts. How do you think so far that the Kenyan government has dealt with how information has been trickling down? Because right now we haven't seen anything yet.
True.
But then the trickling of information, civic education especially, on this coronavirus.
On a scale of 10, I would be generous enough to give the government at least 5, because the government is trying to reduce the negative, and we've heard the president talk about people giving propagandas and also
fake news spreading
and all that. But we know one thing, that in Kenya and in the world generally, there is so much that, especially with the existence of social media, that there is so much which can be let out which is misleading to the public. But getting back to the government, I don't think we were reading about how Kenya is prepared, because this is not something which happened. The coronavirus, the first time it was announced was last year. So this is something which has been there. So my question would be, how has the government been prepared for those months that it has known that this thing is existing. And Kenya is, it was at risk because you know that we do business with most of the countries which are affected.
Yes.
And we have people who are from those countries which come to our country. Which
and most of the cases are actually cases that came in from those countries.
Yes, yes. So I would say that, yes, the government is not doing quite enough. The government is not really doing what is expected because together with the information that they add, they still have some loopholes, if I would say that. Because I remember the uproar which happened after the flight from China, which came from China and brought those Chinese citizens in Kenya. And that really made the country not feel safe, even with the government allowing such. So I would say that, yes, the government, they are there, but they are not there. They are trying, but they are not really trying because the people are not really being educated. If I go to my village, I expect people to know the impact of this and how this is going to affect their lives. But I don't believe that I've heard of or seen any education being given to people on how to prevent themselves from conducting this, apart from what we are hearing from the TVs, apart from the few messages which we are receiving on our lines. But how many people are able to read English? So yes, the government is not really doing enough. And personally, as a Kenyan citizen, I would expect them to at least do much to be able to sensitize the Kenyans and also to be able to educate them. Because, you know, basically the biggest challenge in Kenya is ignorance. And this ignorance, the government should take it upon themselves to be able to educate its citizens. Yes.
Let's talk about public-private partnership, and also, you know, I would like to call it in another language, in this context, CSR. And also, you know, because as much as the government also is responsible for the people, we have corporates also who are existing in the space and are gaining as they serve the Mwananchi. You gave an example of France, the article you're reading, where a company decides, okay, we are going to produce, you know, hand sanitizers, and we're going to give it to the government to distribute it. True. The government right now is putting some really tough measures and is requiring that, you know, in any business establishment, you need to have a hand sanitizer and so on and so forth. Is it high time that we see even our local manufacturers chip in, because some of the people who are going to be affected are their own casual laborers or workers?
True, true. I would say that it's high time that some of these pharmaceuticals or manufacturers who are deal in such come in and say that we have seen the need, we have seen the desperation of Kenyans, and we've come and we've decided to give back to the community through this. Or even other big companies, they can come in and say that we've partnered with this company which produces sanitizers, and we've decided that for whatever they produce, for the bottles they produce, we are going to pay them 60%, we are going to pay 40%. Let it go to the public at the rate of probably the 40%, which is remaining. At a subsidized cost. Also, looking also, the government should also come in and say that we have identified people who are in the business of producing sanitizers, and we have decided to waive taxes. We have decided to give to them this subsidy on their production cost and all that, so that they can be able to reduce the cost of sanitization, so that each Kenyan can be able to afford. So those are some of the things we expect. Those are some of the things which we would like to see. Whereby the private sector is coming in, because you don't need to be able to, you don't need to be in the business of producing sanitizers to help. You can come and say that out of what we had allocated for CSR for this year, we've decided to give this percentage to this company which we have identified to help in reduce the cost of sanitizers and all those disinfectants. Yeah.
And finally, as we also draw to a close, there has been the issue of, you know, foreign nationals being victimized, and especially from Asian countries. whenever they go, even whenever they walk in the streets. And there was also a case where, a family was thrown out of a restaurant because, they're Chinese, I don't know, they're Japanese or they're Korean or from Asia. In our establishments and businesses, how should we, also try to be humane? And I don't know how to put this, but then, have you come across such? Because they walk into your establishment and you're like, all right, they're here. So do you just look at them as them, or are they just clients like any other clients? Of course, precautions. Let's all take precautions and serve each one. They're right.
True. It's quite unfortunate that we have such scenarios. It is quite sad that we can have such things happen in Kenya this time. But what I've seen personally, I've not experienced, but I've seen on social media and the comments which people give. And also I've been to shopping malls where I've seen how such people are being treated. My expectation is that we need to isolate issues and know that there is a Chinese or there is someone from Asia, a Korean, who has been in Kenya since 2016.
Sure, he's a resident.
He's a resident. I have a friend of mine who has been living in Kenya for 39 years. So you cannot tell that person they brought you corona, because corona just came in the other day. So I believe that these are issues which Kenyans need to know, and know that we cannot start victimizing people based on their origin, because anybody can be infected. Everybody is affected by this disease. So we need to be able to separate issues, to be able to, if someone visits your business, you cannot victimize them. You can serve them and make sure you are protective. You protect yourself. You can use the protective measures which you have in place and make sure you serve them the way you would serve any other customer. Yeah, true.
Your closing remarks, Nick, as we wind up. You've got viewers watching you at home. Some of your clients are definitely watching you. Maybe just a word to Kenyans out there at this particular moment, because it is indeed quite a tense moment for all of us and for the society out there. Maybe just your parting shot on the same.
What I would tell Kenyans is that there is no need for alarm. There is no need to panic, because I believe that whatever comes to us comes because God has allowed it. And the Bible tells us that everything works together for good. And if we are called by the name of God, if we are one of those who are called to be of God, then I believe that God has our back. All what we need to do is don't panic, don't give up, just make sure you protect yourself. Don't be paranoid about it. And I'm sure in due time, a solution will come. And my call would be for the government to be able to put in place measures and things which they need to protect its citizens. Yes.
Thank you very much. Nicholas.
Thank you.
I'm used to calling you Nick, so.
And Phil call me Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Viewer, we have come to the end of the program this morning, and really we thank you for finding time and also for joining us. At this particular time, as we are speaking, the whole country, the whole world is talking about the COVID-19, which is the coronavirus. And as we were talking about today, how this is affecting every aspect of our life. Today we saw how it's affecting different spheres of business and how industries in the business sector are also, feeling the pinch. KEPSA says, as we speak today, an average of about 61% of, negative impact on businesses have already been reported. It places the figures at 40% decline for the tourism and hospitality industry. And I'm really thankful that you are able also to hear that from Nick, because he's an entrepreneur and also very well versed in the sector of tourism and hospitality, and we were able to listen from him firsthand, how the industry is suffering and some of the challenges that are being faced in the same. Well, what I can say to you as my viewer, as our esteemed viewer, is that at the moment there's still no cure for this thing, and the only way to keep it at bay is, preventive measures. Let's clean our hands. Remember to keep the distance whenever necessary, but most likely from people who display symptoms that we've clearly been communicated to by the government and other information or info adverts that we've been running also on GBS. And at GBS, we're also trying very much to educate our publics on the same. And we've been running ads from the World Health Organization, and we hope that as you interact with us, you also kept abreast on what you need to do and what you do not have to do. Tomorrow, we will be having guests here on GBS Morning Extra, and we're going to have a very special moment where we are going to interact with you and also engage you on proper hand washing. I know people talk about hand washing, but then what is proper hand washing? And that is actually what we are expecting to, introduce you to tomorrow during our session of GBS Morning Extra. For now, thank you very much, Nick. Once again, asante sana kwa kuja studio. I do hope you have a good day. Viewer, that brings us to the end of this segment. Until tomorrow, God bless you.